Street photography should be simple, yet there are so many rules and opinions on how to do street photography, what is considered real street photography, or even being a real street photographer. And then there is the age-old discussion of having a subject in the frame in order for it to be called a real street photograph, or being aggressive and up in people's faces in order for it to be called real street photography. All these things I had to navigate through to find my own way of doing street photography and what feels comfortable for me. No wonder new or aspiring street photographers find it intimidating starting their own journey in street photography. There is also this unhealthy focus on gear in street photography. So just recently I got familiar with the term called GAS, also known as gear acquisition syndrome, and I can safely say that I suffered from it for years. So basically the urge of buying and owning new gear. And when talking about gear, there's also this focus on having the latest, most advanced gear that would suddenly make you a better street photographer or better street photography. Perhaps owning that advanced gear will make the experience of shooting better for you, but it will not make you a better street photographer. That requires a different skill set. You have to go out and practice your craft. Then there's also the fact that you won't be able to use that advanced gear to its full potential because you might not have developed your own ability or skill set sufficiently enough yet, maybe because you're just starting out on your own journey. So for me, street photography is so much more than gear. I see gear as a necessary and important tool in order for me to make my art. Today I'd like to talk about why street photography should be simple. I'll give you a few perspectives to consider and practical techniques to keep your street photography as simple as possible when you're out there on the streets. Before we get started, I just quickly want to introduce myself. My name is Embreen, aka Hipster in Copenhagen. I also have a website you might want to check out. And on the website, I have my blog with a B and my newsletter. They're both called Fill the Frame, and you can check it out. I also have a complete overview of my gear that I use for street photography and make these videos. All right, let's get back to the video. If you want to get more serious about your street photography, the best thing you can do for yourself is to get out there on the street as much as possible. And don't worry about gear, as I also mentioned before. Gear doesn't matter, especially if you're new to street photography. So whether you have an old DSLR, a disposable camera, or just your smartphone, they're more than enough to get you out there and start shooting. The streets are your real training ground, and the learning and the experience you will get there will serve you well in the long run and also help shape you into the street photographer you're meant to be. But before that training can take effect, you have to have the fundamentals in place, and I think you know what I'm about to say now. A big part of keeping street photography as simple as possible is to reduce or eliminate the aspect that is making that difficult. So I would say not understanding basic camera theory or exposure triangle is a pretty big one. So getting your fundamentals in place will make things so much easier. I promise, I've been there myself. So first and foremost, learn to understand basic camera theory and the exposure triangle. So there are 3 variables, so the ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Understand them individually and understand them in combination, because that way you can properly expose a photo. And once you have that basic understanding, you will also be able to master manual mode. And I'm not saying you should go out and use manual mode for all your photography from now on. It's just a good indication that if you understand manual mode, you understand how the camera operates. Think of it as building a house where the foundation is metaphorically the exposure triangle, where the rest of the house will be built upon it, and you don't really want to build a house on an unstable or correct foundation, right? Once you have the street photography fundamentals in place, you can start using the techniques I mentioned before to practically make your photographs more simple in nature. Most street photographers struggle with keeping their photograph clean and simple. Often there are just too many distracting elements, and that can be they're cluttered with subjects, bad composition, or maybe they're just an unclear story or focus in the photograph. Moving on to the techniques you can practice to keep your photograph simple and inviting for the viewer. All of them focus on eliminating distractions from your photograph and put focus back on storytelling. My favorite technique is that I often use longer focal lengths like the 55 or 85mm or basically anything above that to naturally eliminate any distractions in the scene that you're trying to capture. So for example, if you're somewhere very crowded. And this is because of the narrow field of view that these focal lengths provide. So think of it as zooming in without zooming in. Another favorite technique to eliminate distractions from my photographs and keeping them simple is to use shallow depth of field. So basically the larger apertures like 1.4 or 1.8. So basically the lowest your lens can go to. Because using shallow depth of field creates that blurry background that can help reduce or eliminate any unwanted distractions in your scene. And this is a very easy technique because once you have that, you can really put focus on your element or the subject you're trying to capture. This technique I haven't used as much as the two others that I just mentioned, but you can use foreground elements to frame up a shot to create that unique and interesting perspective and composition. And it also naturally removes any distractions in your photograph. When using foreground elements, I look for naturally occurring elements like trees, pillars, surfaces, so I'm really observant of my surroundings and the scene that I'm trying to frame up. Street photography can be simple and should be simple. So the more you practice your craft, the easier and simpler it will become. And having a few tools and techniques to help you along the way is not so bad either. I'll see you on the next one and the next one. Okay, bye.